Betrayal by someone you loved is one of the most confusing emotional experiences a person can go through because it doesn't just break trust. It breaks the version of reality you were living inside, and that is why it hurts in a way you cannot easily explain. Right now, your mind is trying to do something very human. It is replaying everything, every memory, every conversation, every moment that now feels different in hindsight. Because you are searching for one thing. Where did it go wrong? But the deeper truth is, betrayal rarely feels like a single moment. It feels like a collapse of meaning. Someone you trusted didn't just hurt you. They changed the emotional structure you built your life around. And suddenly, nothing feels stable anymore. Not your memories, not your judgment, not even your understanding of people. And that is why this pain is so intense. Because you are not only grieving what happened, you are grieving what you believed was real. But here is the part most people never understand. Betrayal is not just an ending, it is an exposure. It exposes what you ignored. It exposes what you projected. It exposes what you were willing to overlook for the sake of emotional attachment. And if you stay with this video until the end, you will see something most people never fully realize. That betrayal doesn't just reveal who they were. It reveals who you were becoming while trusting them. And that realization changes everything, because once you see it clearly, you don't just recover from betrayal, you evolve because of it. Why does betrayal hit deeper than simple heartbreak? Betrayal doesn't just hurt, it destabilizes your inner world. Because the pain is not only about what happened, but about the unexpectedness of what happened. Your mind builds emotional safety through patterns, through predictability, through the belief that the people closest to you will behave within a certain moral and emotional framework. So when betrayal occurs, it doesn't just break trust, it breaks prediction. And that is why the emotional impact feels so intense. It is not simply sadness, it is confusion mixed with shock, disbelief, and internal disorientation. Your mind keeps trying to align what you experienced with what you believed was true, and the two refuse to match. This creates a kind of psychological fracture, because suddenly the person you trusted becomes someone you cannot fully interpret anymore. And if one close connection becomes unpredictable, your mind begins to question other connections too. This is why betrayal often expands beyond the relationship itself. It affects your perception of people, relationships, and even your own judgment. Stoic philosophy describes suffering not as the event itself, but as the disruption of our internal expectations about how the world should behave. And betrayal is exactly that disruption, but beneath the shock lies something deeper beginning to form. Awareness. Because once the illusion of certainty breaks, you begin to see reality more clearly, even if it hurts. And clarity, although painful at first, is the beginning of emotional truth. What if betrayal didn't create pain, but destroyed an illusion you were living inside? One of the hardest parts of betrayal is not what the other person did. It is what your mind built around them before it happened. Because long before betrayal becomes an event, it becomes impossible in your imagination. You create a silent agreement with reality. This person is safe. This connection is stable. This bond is different. And without noticing it, you begin to invest emotionally in that belief. Every good moment strengthens it. Every shared memory reinforces it. Every sign of closeness makes it feel more permanent than it actually is. But here is the subtle truth. You were not only relating to a person, you were also relating to a story about them, and that story felt real enough to guide your emotions, your expectations, and your trust. So when betrayal happens, it doesn't just break a relationship. It breaks the narrative your mind depended on to feel emotionally secure. That is why the pain feels disproportionate. It is not only about what happened in the present moment, it is about the collapse of an entire imagined future. Carl Jung once suggested that we often project unconscious expectations onto others, seeing not just who they are, but who we need them to be. And betrayal becomes the moment reality interrupts projection, not to punish you, but to wake you up. Because once the story breaks, you're forced to see something uncomfortable but important. You were never just experiencing them, you were experiencing your interpretation of them. And when that interpretation dissolves, what remains is truth, unfiltered, unfamiliar but real, and that truth is where transformation begins. What if the deepest wound is also a hidden mirror? There is a turning point in every betrayal story that most people try to avoid. It is the moment when the focus shifts away from the other person and quietly turns inward, not to blame yourself, but to understand yourself. Because after the shock fades and the questions slow down, a deeper awareness begins to surface, almost reluctantly at first. You start remembering the moments you ignored, the instincts you dismissed, the discomfort you explained away just to keep peace. And suddenly, a difficult realization appears. You were not only trusting them, you were also negotiating with your own intuition. This is where betrayal becomes something more than loss. It becomes exposure, not of their character alone, but of your patterns. How much you tolerate when you care deeply, how quickly you rationalize behavior that doesn't feel right, how often you prioritize connection over clarity. This is not a moment of self-judgment. It is a moment of self-recognition, because what is being revealed is not weakness. It is awareness of where your emotional boundaries were flexible without your full consent. Stoic thinkers like Marcus Aurelius often emphasize that external events do not disturb us as much as our internal responses to them. And betrayal forces you to see those responses clearly. It shows you where your trust was placed. It shows you where your judgment was influenced by emotion. And most importantly, it shows you where you abandoned yourself in small ways to preserve something you value deeply. And that realization, although uncomfortable, carries something powerful inside it. The beginning of change, because once you see your patterns, you are no longer fully controlled by them. You begin to step outside them, and awareness is where freedom starts forming. What if this wasn't your breaking point, but your awakening point? There is a moment after betrayal where something unexpected happens. The emotional storm doesn't completely disappear, but it stops feeling like it owns you. And in that quiet space, a new kind of understanding begins to form. Not about them, about you. Because once the shock, the confusion, and the replaying of memories starts to fade, you begin to notice something deeper. You are still here, breathing, thinking, becoming aware. Even after what felt like emotional collapse, you are still standing inside your own life. And that realization carries a hidden strength most people overlook. It shows you that what broke wasn't your ability to live. It was your attachment to how you thought life should be. And that difference changes everything. Because now, betrayal is no longer just a painful memory. It becomes a threshold, a point where your emotional identity begins to shift from dependency into awareness. You start noticing changes in yourself. You trust slower but more wisely. You see patterns you once ignored. You value clarity over comfort. You stop chasing closure from people who created confusion, and without forcing it, something inside you begins to reorganize itself. This is what many philosophers point toward when they speak of suffering as a teacher. Not because pain is good, but because it reveals what comfort hides. Buddhism would call this awakening through impermanence. Stoicism would call it strengthening through acceptance. Modern psychology would call it post-traumatic growth. But in simple human terms, it is this: you are no longer the same person who trusted blindly. And that is why this betrayal matters. Because it didn't just show you who someone else was. It showed you who you are becoming when illusions are removed. And that version of you is stronger, quieter, and far more aware than before. Not because you were never hurt, but because you chose to understand it instead of becoming it. So if you are still sitting with this pain, don't rush to erase it. Listen to it, because one day you will look back and realize the betrayal didn't define your ending. It defined your awareness, and awareness is what finally frees you from repeating the same story again.